The winter of 1885 had descended upon Montana with a vengeance, wrapping the land in a shroud of white that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. In the parlor of a grand house in Silver Creek, Clara Whitmore sat perfectly still before her vanity, watching her trembling fingers attempt to conceal the fresh bruise blooming across her cheekbone. The powder did little to hide the purple-yellow edges, but she applied it anyway, a ritual as familiar as breathing. She had been beautiful once. Everyone said so. The belle of Boston society, with honey-colored hair that caught the light like spun gold and eyes the color of spring violets. That was before she'd been promised to Samuel Whitmore, a wealthy merchant who'd made his fortune in the booming mining towns of the West. Her father had called it a splendid match. Her mother had wept with joy. Clara had smiled and nodded, as daughters were taught to do. 3 years had passed since their wedding day, and beauty had become a curse she wore like shackles. "Clara!" Samuel's voice thundered from downstairs, causing her to flinch. The powder brush slipped from her fingers, scattering pale dust across the mahogany surface. "Where's my supper?" "Coming, Samuel!" she called back, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. She'd learned to hide the tremor, to swallow the tears before they could fall. Tears only made things worse. The kitchen was warm with steam from the stove, but Clara shivered as she ladled stew into Samuel's preferred bowl, the blue china with gold trim. Never the everyday pottery. Everything had to be just so. The bread sliced to exactly half an inch. The butter softened, but not melted. The whiskey poured to precisely 2 fingers' width. She carried the tray to the dining room where Samuel sat reading the territorial newspaper, his thick fingers drumming impatiently on the table. He didn't look up when she set the food before him, didn't acknowledge her presence until he'd taken his first bite. "Cold," he pronounced, though steam still rose from the bowl. "I'm sorry, I'll—" The backhand came without warning, sending her stumbling against the wall. The tray clattered to the floor, china shattering into pieces that reflected the lamplight like fallen stars. "Useless!" Samuel spat, rising from his chair. He was a large man, built like the bulls he traded, with hands that had never known gentleness. "Can't even manage a simple meal? What good are you?" Clara pressed herself against the wall, knowing that running would only make it worse. She'd tried that once, in the early days when she still believed she could change him, could find the charming man who'd courted her with flowers and sweet words. That night had taught her the futility of resistance. But tonight, something was different. As Samuel's fist connected with her ribs, as pain exploded through her body and she crumpled to the floor amid the broken china, Clara felt something inside her break too. Not her spirit, that had been fracturing for years. Something else. The last thread of hope that things might change, that she might somehow earn his kindness if she just tried harder, loved better, became smaller. She lay there after he'd stormed out to the saloon, leaving her with the mess and the pain and the silence. Blood trickled from where a shard of china had cut her palm. It dripped onto the Turkish carpet, each drop a small rebellion against the perfect order Samuel demanded, moving carefully, each breath sending fire through her bruised ribs. Clara cleaned the dining room. She swept the broken pieces into a dustpan, mopped the spilled stew, set everything right again. But when she returned to her room, instead of preparing for bed, she pulled a carpet bag from beneath the wardrobe. Into it went 2 dresses, practical wool, not the silk gowns Samuel insisted she wear, her mother's silver brush, a photograph of her sister Margaret, dead these 5 years from scarlet fever, the bundle of letters Margaret had written during her brief marriage to a cavalry officer, filled with stories of adventure and freedom in the territories, a small pouch of coins she'd hidden away, one here, one there, when Samuel wasn't watching, and finally, folded small and tucked into her bodice, the letter that had arrived last month, the one she'd hidden before Samuel could see it. Written in a shaky hand she didn't recognize. It spoke of Margaret's daughter, a child Clara hadn't known existed, now orphaned and alone in a mission school near Bozeman. Clara dressed in her warmest clothes, layering 2 petticoats beneath her traveling dress. She wrapped her heaviest shawl around her shoulders and pulled on the sturdy boots she wore for winter walks. Moving like a ghost through the house, she took what food she could carry: hard bread, dried meat, a handful of apples from the cellar. At the back door, she hesitated. Beyond lay the wilderness, the unknown, possibly death. Behind her lay certain slow destruction, a life measured in bruises and broken bones, in careful steps and held breath. The choice, when framed that way, was no choice at all. The snow fell thick and heavy as Clara stepped into the night. The cold bit at her face, but she welcomed it. It numbed the pain, made her feel alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. She knew Samuel wouldn't return until dawn, drunk and stumbling. By then, she needed to be far away. The train station was out of the question, too public, too easy to trace. Instead, she turned toward the mountains, following the old trapper's trail Margaret had written about in her letters. Somewhere out there was Bozeman, and a little girl who needed her. Somewhere out there was a life that might be worth living. Hours passed in a blur of white. Clara's feet grew numb despite the boots. Ice crystals formed on her eyelashes, and her breath came in painful gasps that sent spikes of agony through her damaged ribs. The trail, barely visible in daylight, had vanished entirely beneath the fresh snow. Still she pressed on, driven by a desperation stronger than fear. When the storm worsened, turning the world into a howling wall of white, Clara finally admitted she was lost. The mountains that had seemed like salvation now loomed as threats, their peaks invisible in the darkness. She stumbled over hidden rocks, fell twice into drifts that nearly swallowed her whole. Her strength, already depleted by years of poor nutrition and constant fear, began to fail. It was then, as she struggled up yet another slope, that her foot found empty air where ground should have been. She tumbled down an embankment, the carpetbag flying from her frozen fingers, her body rolling through snow and brush until a pine tree stopped her fall with brutal efficiency. Clara lay there, gasping, staring up at the snow falling endlessly from a black sky. This was how it would end. Then, frozen in the wilderness. A cautionary tale whispered about foolish women who didn't know their place. Samuel would tell everyone she'd gone mad, run off in a fit of female hysteria. No one would question him. No one ever did. But as the cold crept deeper into her bones, as her eyes grew heavy with the dangerous sleep that comes before freezing, Clara found she wasn't afraid. For the first time in 3 years, no one would strike her for sleeping without permission. No one would criticize the way she breathed, the way she walked, the way she existed in space meant for others. If this was death, it was still freer than her life had been. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a flicker of light through the trees, too steady for lightning, too warm for stars. A lantern, perhaps, or the hallucination of a dying mind. Either way, Clara Whitmore closed her eyes and let the mountain take her, her last thought a prayer not for salvation, but for Margaret's daughter, somewhere out there in the vast wilderness, waiting for an aunt who would never come. She didn't see the figure trudging through the snow, drawn by something, instinct, perhaps, or the strange way sound carried in the mountains during a storm. Didn't feel the strong arms that lifted her from the snow, or hear the muttered curses of a man who'd thought his days of finding broken things in the wilderness were long behind him. Elias Hartley had come to check his cattle, sheltered in a box canyon near the tree line. He'd found instead a woman near death, her face pale as the snow that surrounded her, her lips tinged blue with cold. He should have left her. That's what the mountains taught you. Take care of your own. Don't borrow trouble. But something in her face, peaceful despite the bruises that even frostbite couldn't hide, made him bend and gather her into his arms. The journey back to his cabin was hard, fighting through drifts with her dead weight in his arms. But Elias was mountain-born, mountain-hardened, and he'd carried heavier loads than one half-frozen woman. By the time he kicked open his door and laid her before the fire, the storm had become a blizzard that would seal the passes for days. Looking down at the unconscious woman, her fine clothes now sodden with snowmelt. Elias Hartley wondered what desperate flight had driven her into the killing cold of a Montana winter night. The bruises on her face and the careful way she'd curled around her ribs, even in unconsciousness, told part of the story. The wedding ring on her finger, which she'd clutched protectively even while freezing, told another. He'd sworn, after Mary died, that he'd live alone until his bones joined hers in the churchyard. The mountains were company enough, the cattle conversation enough. He needed no one, wanted no one. But the mountains had their own laws, and one of them was simple. You didn't leave anything to die in the cold if you could help it, not even a woman who was clearly running from something, or someone. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, sealing them both inside whatever fate had begun when Clara Whitmore stepped into the snow, and Elias Hartley stepped out to check his cattle. The old trapper's cabin, built to withstand the worst Montana could offer, settled into the storm with creaks and groans, while inside, two lives that should never have intersected began their slow, inexorable merge. Clara woke to warmth and the smell of wood smoke. For a moment, caught between sleep and waking, she thought she was a child again in her father's house, safe in her bed with Margaret singing softly in the next room. Then memory crashed back. Samuel's fist, the flight through snow, the terrible cold, and her eyes flew open. She lay on a rough-hewn bed covered with thick wool blankets and what appeared to be a bearskin. Above her, log beams stretched across a ceiling blackened with years of smoke. The room was small but clean, with a stone fireplace crackling cheerfully against one wall. Morning light filtered through oiled paper windows, casting everything in a gentle amber glow. "Easy there." The voice came from near the fire. Clara turned her head, wincing at the movement, to see a man sitting in a wooden chair, a rifle across his knees. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair shot through with premature silver and a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were simple: wool trousers, a flannel shirt, worn boots, but clean and well-mended. "You've been sleeping near on 2 days," he continued, his voice low and measured. "Thought for a while you might not wake at all." Clara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The man, her rescuer, she supposed, rose and poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. He approached slowly, as one might approach a spooked horse, and helped her sit up enough to drink. "Small sips," he advised. "Your body's been through quite an ordeal." The water was cool and sweet. Clara had never tasted anything so wonderful. When she'd drunk her fill, she managed to whisper, "Where?" "My cabin. About 15 miles northwest of Silver Creek, up in the mountains. Name's Elias Hartley." He settled back in his chair, studying her with dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Found you half buried in snow near the tree line. You're lucky. Another hour and the mountain would have claimed you for good." Clara pulled the blankets higher, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. But Elias made no move toward her, just sat quietly, giving her time to gather herself. I was lost," she said finally. "The storm came up so quickly that it did." His tone was neutral, but those keen eyes took in the fading bruises on her face, the way she held herself carefully to protect her ribs. "You running from something, ma'am, or someone?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara felt tears threaten. When was the last time someone had asked her a direct question and waited for an honest answer? But years of caution held her tongue. I just needed to get away," she said. "I have family in Bozeman. I was trying to reach them. In a blizzard, at night, alone." Elias's voice held no judgment, just a statement of facts. "Must be some powerful need driving you." Clara said nothing. After a moment, Elias stood. "Well, you're safe here, Mrs. "Clara," she said quickly. "Just Clara." He nodded, accepting the half-truth. "Clara, then, you're safe here until you're healed enough to travel. The passes are snowed in anyway. Won't be clear for at least a week. Maybe 2. You hungry?" At the mention of food, Clara's stomach clenched with hunger. She nodded, and Elias moved to the stove in the corner. Soon the smell of frying bacon filled the cabin, making her mouth water. While he cooked, Clara took in her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was sparse but well kept. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Books, surprising in such a remote place, lined a shelf near the fireplace. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone by choice, who had created order in his solitude. On the mantel, she noticed a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Beside it, a smaller photograph of the same woman holding an infant. Both were draped with black ribbon. Elias returned with a plate of food: bacon, biscuits, some preserved peaches. "Go slow," he warned. "You haven't eaten in days." The food was simple but good. Clara ate carefully, aware of his watchful presence. When she finished, exhaustion crashed over her again. "Rest," Elias said, taking the empty plate. "Healing takes time. We've got plenty of that here." Over the following days, a routine established itself. Clara would wake to find Elias already up, tending the fire or preparing breakfast. He would check her injuries with clinical detachment, noting the improvement in her ribs, the fading of the bruises. Then he would disappear outside for hours, returning with firewood or fresh game, covered in snow but never complaining. He asked no questions about her past, and she offered no information. They existed in a careful dance of distance, two damaged souls sharing space but not stories. Clara began to help where she could, at first, just sitting up to mend a tear in his shirt while he was out. Then, as her strength returned, she ventured to the stove to prepare simple meals. Elias said nothing the first time he returned to find stew bubbling on the stove. But she caught something: surprise, appreciation, flicker across his weathered features. The cabin, she learned, ran on rhythms dictated by weather and necessity. Morning meant tending the animals, a few cattle in a lean-to shelter, chickens in a coop built to withstand predators. Afternoon meant maintenance, splitting wood, mending harnesses, the endless small tasks that kept a mountain homestead running. Evening meant settling by the fire, Elias reading while Clara sewed, the silence between them gradually shifting from awkward to companionable. One evening, a week into her stay, Clara found herself stealing glances at him over her mending. In the firelight, the harsh lines of his face softened. She could see the younger man he'd been before a loss carved those deep grooves around his eyes. "The woman in the photograph," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Your wife?" Elias's hand stilled on the book he was reading. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Mary," he said finally, "died 6 winters ago. Fever took her and our boy within days of each other." "I'm sorry." "So was I." He stared into the fire. "Sorry enough to think about following them more than once. But the mountains don't let you quit that easy. Always something needs doing. Cows to feed, fences to mend. Before you know it, years have passed and you're still here, still breathing, whether you wanted to or not." Clara understood that feeling too well. How many times had she thought about ending things, only to find herself still setting Samuel's table, still pressing his shirts, still breathing despite everything? "Why stay?" she asked. "Why not go somewhere easier?" Elias shrugged. "This is home. Mary loved it here, said the mountains made her feel close to God. Can't say I feel the same, but sometimes, when the wind's just right, I swear I can hear her laughing." He shook his head, seeming embarrassed by the admission. "Foolish talk." "No," Clara said softly. "Not foolish at all." Their eyes met across the small space, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Here was someone else who knew what it meant to be hollowed out by loss, to continue existing when existence itself felt like betrayal. That night, Clara's dreams were different. Instead of Samuel's rage, she dreamed of mountains and steady hands, of a voice that asked questions and waited for answers. She woke to find herself crying, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of fear. The next morning brought new snow, and with it a restlessness in Clara. Her body was healing, The ribs only ached now instead of screaming. The bruises faded to yellow-green shadows. She should be thinking about leaving, about continuing to Bozeman. But the thought of venturing back into the world, where Samuel might be searching for her, made her stomach clench with dread. She was kneading bread dough, finding comfort in the rhythmic motion. When Elias returned from checking his trap lines, he paused in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, watching her work. "You've done this before," he observed. "My mother taught me." Clara shaped the dough with practiced hands. She said a woman should know how to make bread. No matter how many servants she might have, bread is life, she used to say. Know how to make it, and you'll never be truly helpless. Wise woman. She was. Clara's hands stilled. She died when I was 17. If she'd lived. She trailed off. If her mother had lived, would she have seen through Samuel's charm? Would she have prevented the marriage that had become Clara's prison? "Can't change the past," Elias said quietly. "Believe me, I've tried. All we can do is face what comes next." That night, the wind howled with particular fury, rattling the windows and sending drafts through every tiny gap in the logs. Clara shivered despite the fire, pulling her shawl tighter, without a word. Elias rose and returned with another blanket, draping it around her shoulders with careful hands that didn't linger. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded and returned to his chair, but she noticed he'd moved it slightly closer to hers. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside while the fire crackled peacefully within. It should have felt awkward, two strangers trapped by weather and circumstance. But instead, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Safe. The feeling terrified her more than any blizzard. As the second week began, the boundaries between them continued to soften. Clara found herself humming while she worked. Old songs her mother had taught her. Once, she caught Elias listening from the doorway, a strange expression on his face. "Don't stop," he said when she fell silent. It's been a long time since there was music here." So she continued, her voice rusty but growing stronger, filling the cabin with melodies she'd thought forgotten. Sometimes Elias would pause in his work to listen, his hands still on whatever task he'd been doing, lost in some memory she couldn't share. One afternoon, while Clara was mending one of his shirts, she noticed him favoring his left shoulder as he split wood outside. When he came in, she gestured to the chair. "Sit," she said, surprising them both with the firm tone. "That shoulder's been bothering you for days." "It's nothing. Old injury." "Sit," she repeated. He sat. Clara moved behind him, hesitating only a moment before placing her hands on his shoulder. She could feel the knots of tension through his shirt, the muscles rigid with years of hard work and harder solitude. "My mother suffered from aching joints," she said, beginning to work her thumbs into the tight muscles. "I used to do this for her." Elias said nothing, but gradually, incrementally, she felt him relax under her hands. It was such a simple thing, touch without violence, care without cost. Yet Clara found her hands trembling as she worked, aware of the warmth of him, the solid strength that had carried her from the snow. When she finished, stepping back, Elias turned to look at her. Something had shifted in his dark eyes. A wall lowered just enough to glimpse what lay behind. "Thank you," he said simply. That night, Clara woke screaming. The nightmare had been vivid. Samuel finding her, dragging her back, his hands around her throat. She sat up gasping, disoriented in the darkness, still feeling phantom fingers crushing her windpipe. "Clara!" Elias was there, a solid presence in the dim light from the banked fire. He didn't touch her, just crouched beside the bed, his voice low and calm. "You're safe. It's just a dream. You're safe here." She couldn't finish, couldn't breathe properly. "Breathe with me," Elias said. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it, slow and steady." She focused on his voice, matching her breathing to his until the panic receded. Only then did she realize she'd grabbed his hand, was clutching it like a lifeline. She started to let go, embarrassed, but he held on gently. "It's all right," he said. "We all have demons that visit in the night." They stayed like that until her trembling stopped, until the fire burned low and the cabin grew cold. Finally, Elias rose to tend the fire, and Clara lay back down, but sleep wouldn't return. She could hear him moving quietly, adding wood, adjusting the damper. "Elias," she whispered. He paused. "Yes? Thank you. For everything. For not asking questions I can't answer." In the dim light, she saw him nod. "We all have things we're not ready to speak of. When you are, if you ever are, I'll listen. Until then, you're welcome here." The simple acceptance in his words broke something inside her. Clara turned her face into the pillow and wept silently, mourning the woman she'd been before Samuel, the trust that had been beaten out of her, the future she'd once imagined. But mixed with the grief was something else, a tiny spark of hope that perhaps, in this cabin at the edge of the world, she might find a way to become someone new. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing them away from a world that had shown them both such cruelty. Inside, two wounded souls began the slow, careful process of learning that not all touch brought pain, not all silence meant danger, and that sometimes the most unexpected places could become sanctuary. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold, Clara made a decision. When the passes cleared, she would have to face whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, she would allow herself to heal. Not just her body, but the deeper wounds that no amount of arnica could touch. She rose and began preparing breakfast, humming softly. When Elias emerged from the lean-to where he'd been feeding the animals, she had coffee waiting, strong and hot, the way she'd learned he liked it. "Smells good," he said, warming his hands around the cup. "It's the least I can do." Clara replied, then gathered her courage. "Elias, my full name is Clara Whitmore, and someday, when I'm ready, I'll tell you why I was running through a blizzard in the dead of night." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "When you're ready," he agreed. "Until then, you're just Clara, and you're welcome at my table." It wasn't much, just words over morning coffee, but it felt like a beginning. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unforgiving, but inside the small cabin, warmth grew between two people who had forgotten that hearts could do more than simply endure. The days grew longer as February yielded to March, and with the lengthening light came a shift in the cabin's atmosphere. What had begun as careful coexistence evolved into something warmer, though neither Clara nor Elias could name it. They moved around each other with increasing ease, learning each other's rhythms like dancers finding their steps. It started with small things, the way Elias's hand would brush Clara's as she handed him his coffee, lingering a moment longer than necessary. How Clara would look up from her sewing to find him watching her, his expression softening before he turned back to his book. The comfortable silences that stretched between them, no longer empty but full of unspoken understanding. One morning, Clara found Elias in the barn, tending to a horse she hadn't seen before, a mare with a wounded foreleg, her coat matted with dried blood. "Found her down by the creek," he explained, running gentle hands along the injury. "Looks like she tangled with some barbed wire from one of the mining camps. Fools leave it everywhere." Clara watched as he cleaned the wound with careful precision, murmuring soothing words when the mare flinched. There was such tenderness in his movements, such patience. This was a man who knew how to be gentle, who chose to be despite the hardness life had shown him. "Can I help?" she asked. "Hold her head. Talk to her while I wrap this." Clara stroked the mare's neck, speaking softly about nothing in particular. The weather, the view from the cabin window, how the chickens had taken to following her around the yard. The horse gradually calmed, and Elias worked in concentrated silence. "You're good with animals," he observed when they finished. "We had horses when I was young, before." She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. "Before my father lost his money in bad investments. We had to sell everything. I cried for weeks over losing my mare." "Buttercup," Such a silly name. But I was 8 and she was yellow as sunshine. Nothing silly about loving something, Elias said quietly. Their eyes met and held. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away, but not before she caught the slight smile tugging at his lips. They worked together to settle the mare in a stall, spreading fresh straw and ensuring she had water and feed. When Clara stumbled over a loose board, Elias caught her elbow, steadying her. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, not fear, but something else entirely, something that made her breath catch and her pulse quicken. "Careful," he murmured, his hand warm through the fabric of her sleeve. "I'm always careful," she replied, the words carrying more weight than intended. His grip gentled but didn't release. Maybe it's time to be a little less careful. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then the mare nickered, breaking the spell, and Elias stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should check the trap lines," he said, already moving toward the door. Clara watched him go, pressing her hand to where he'd touched her, feeling the ghost of warmth there. She was in dangerous territory. She knew she was still a married woman. Regardless of what Samuel had done, society had rules, expectations. But here, so far from society's watchful eyes, those rules seemed as distant as the stars. That evening, as they shared their usual quiet dinner, Clara found herself studying Elias's hands as he cut his meat. Strong hands, scarred from years of hard work, but capable of such gentleness. She thought of how those hands had lifted her from the snow, had tended her injuries without taking liberties, had steadied her just hours before. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "Caught." Clara fumbled for words. "I was just... Your hands, they tell a story." He set down his fork, extending one hand palm up on the table. "This scar's from when I was 12. Tried to break a Mustang before I was ready. This one's from building the cabin. Nail went straight through, and this..." He indicated a thin white line across his thumb. "Mary was learning to gut fish. She was so horrified when she caught me instead that she cried for an hour. You must miss her terribly." "I do." He turned his hand over, studying it as if seeing it anew. "But lately, the missing doesn't cut as deep. Lately, I remember more of the good times than the ending." "What was she like?" Elias leaned back, a distant smile playing at his lips. "Stubborn as a mule when she set her mind to something. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but sang anyway. Made the worst biscuits in the territory. Hard enough to drive nails with. But I ate them and told her they were delicious." His voice softened. "She had the biggest heart of anyone I've known. Saw the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. She sounds wonderful." She was. He met Clara's eyes. "I think she would have liked you, would have admired your strength." "Strength?" Clara laughed bitterly. "I ran away in the dead of night like a thief." "You survived," Elias corrected. "You got yourself out of a bad situation. That takes more courage than most people have." The tears came suddenly, surprising her. Elias rose and came around the table, crouching beside her chair as he had that night she'd woken from nightmares. "I'm not brave," she whispered. "I'm terrified all the time. Terrified he'll find me. Terrified of what comes next. Terrified of..." "Of what?" She looked at him through her tears. This good man who'd shown her nothing but kindness. "Terrified of feeling again, of hoping, of wanting things I have no right to want." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Slowly, giving her time to pull away. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it sent warmth spreading through her chest. "We all want things we think we shouldn't," he said softly. "Doesn't make us wrong, just makes us human." Clara covered his hand with hers, pressing it to her cheek. They stayed frozen like that for a long moment, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then, with visible effort, Elias pulled back, standing. "It's late," he said roughly. "We should both get some rest." But rest proved elusive. Clara lay in bed listening to him moving about the main room, banking the fire, checking the locks, the nighttime rituals she'd come to find comforting. When silence finally fell, she found herself straining to hear his breathing from his bedroll by the fire, wondering if he was as wakeful as she. The next day brought a late spring storm, trapping them inside. They worked in companionable silence, Clara mending clothes while Elias repaired a harness. But the awareness between them had shifted, deepened. Every accidental touch sent sparks through her. Every glance lasted a heartbeat too long. When evening came, Elias surprised her by bringing out a wooden box she hadn't seen before. Mary loved cribbage, he said, producing a worn deck of cards and a board. Haven't played since, well, would you like to learn? Clara had played cards before, stiff, formal games in Boston parlors where the stakes were social standing and marriageable daughters. This was different. Elias was patient as he taught her the rules, laughing when she miscount points, his whole face transforming with the expression. She found herself making mistakes just to see that smile again. "You're hustling me," he accused after she won her third game. "A lady never hustles," Clara replied primly, then ruined it by grinning. "Is that so?" He leaned back, studying her with those dark eyes that saw too much. "What else don't ladies do?" The question hung in the air, loaded with possibilities. Clara felt her pulse quicken. "Ladies don't run away in blizzards," she said. "They don't hide in mountain cabins with strangers. They don't—" She paused, gathering courage. "They don't think about kissing men who aren't their husbands." Elias went very still. "Clara, I know." She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know it's wrong. I'm married, even if it's to a monster. You're still mourning Mary. We barely know each other. I know all the reasons why this, whatever this is impossible." He rose too, moving closer but not touching. "Do you want to know what I know?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I know you hum when you're content. I know you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I know you're kind to animals and patient with stubborn men. I know you're stronger than you believe and braver than you feel." He paused, his voice dropping. "And I know I haven't felt this alive since Mary died. Didn't think I could feel this way again." "Elias." His name came out as barely a whisper. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I wouldn't, not while you're still bound to another. But Clara, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." The promise in those words broke something loose in her chest. She stepped forward, rising on her toes, and pressed her lips to his cheek, a chaste kiss that nonetheless sent fire through her veins. "Thank you," she breathed against his skin, "for everything." When she pulled back, his eyes were closed, his hands clenched at his sides as if physically restraining himself. She understood the feeling. That night, she heard him leave his bedroll and go outside. Through the window, she could see him standing in the snow, face turned up to the sky, letting the cold wind cool whatever fever burned in him. She pressed her palm to the glass, wishing she had the right to go to him, to offer comfort as he'd offered her. The injured mare recovered over the following days, and caring for her became a shared ritual. They worked in harmony, Clara holding the horse steady while Elias changed bandages, their movements synchronized without need for words. Once, when the mare shied unexpectedly, they collided, Elias's arms coming around Clara to steady them both. For a moment, they stood pressed together, his chest warm against her back, his breath stirring her hair. Clara felt his heart racing, matching the wild tempo of her own. Then, carefully, he released her and stepped back. "Sorry," he muttered. "Don't be," she said softly. "Please don't be." The tension between them grew daily, a sweet ache that colored every interaction. When Clara laughed at something, really laughed, free and unguarded, she caught the wonder in Elias's expression, as if her joy was a gift he hadn't expected. When he came in from the cold, cheeks reddened by wind, she had to resist the urge to warm them with her hands. One evening, as Clara was preparing for bed, she realized her wedding ring was gone. Panic seized her, not because she valued it, but because its absence felt like a declaration she wasn't ready to make. She searched frantically until Elias found her on her knees by the bed. "What's wrong?" "My ring. I can't find—" She broke off at his expression. "What?" Wordlessly, he went to the mantel and retrieved something from behind Mary's photograph. Her ring glinted in his palm. "Found it by the wash basin this morning," he said. "Figured you might want it back, or—" He paused. "Or maybe you don't." Clara stared at the circle of gold that had been her shackle for 3 years. Such a small thing to carry such weight. Slowly, she stood and walked to him, but instead of taking the ring, she closed his fingers around it. "Keep it," she said. "Or throw it in the fire. Or sell it. I don't care. It's not mine anymore. Clara, are you sure? This is— I know what it is." She met his eyes steadily. "And I know what I'm doing. That ring was never about love or commitment. It was about ownership. I won't wear it again." Elias searched her face, then nodded slowly. He turned to the fire, and for a moment she thought he would cast the ring into the flames. Instead, he placed it on the highest shelf, out of sight. "In case you change your mind," he said. "I won't." They stood there, the fire crackling between them, the weight of unspoken words heavy in the air. Clara knew she should step back, should maintain the careful distance that kept them both safe from scandal and heartbreak. Instead, she stepped closer. "Elias," she said, and his name was question and answer both. He made a sound low in his throat, part groan, part surrender. Then his hands were in her hair, gentle but sure, tilting her face up to his. He gave her every chance to pull away, moving slowly, telegraphing his intent. She didn't pull away. The kiss was everything first kisses should be, tentative and sweet, a question posed and answered in the meeting of lips. Clara had been kissed before, but never like this, never with such careful reverence, such restrained passion. She could feel Elias holding back, letting her set the pace, and it made her brave. She pressed closer, her hands finding his shoulders, parting her lips in invitation. He made that sound again, deeper this time, and gathered her against him like she was something precious and breakable and absolutely necessary. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Clara felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. Everything looked the same, the cabin, the fire, the snow falling steadily outside, but nothing would ever be quite the same again. "Clara," Elias said, her name rough with emotion. She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing whatever noble thing he'd been about to say. "Not tonight. Tonight. Just hold me. Please." He folded her into his arms without hesitation, and they stood there as the fire burned low. Two people finding something they'd thought lost forever, the possibility of happiness, the promise of healing, the hope that broken things could be made whole again. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, spring had finally come. The snow began to melt in earnest as March gave way to April, revealing the earth beneath in patches of brown and tentative green. With the changing season came a change in the rhythm of life at the cabin. Elias took Clara with him on his daily rounds, teaching her the ways of the mountain homestead. "See here," he said one morning, pointing to tracks in the mud near the creek. "Wolf pack passed through last night. They're following the elk down from the high country." Clara studied the prints with fascination. "Will they bother the livestock?" "Not if we're careful. Wolves are smart. They know humans mean trouble, but a hungry pack might risk it." He showed her how to read the signs, the depth of the print indicating the animal's weight, the spacing revealing its gait. "Mountain teaches you to pay attention. Miss the signs, and it'll cost you." They walked together through the awakening forest, Elias pointing out the earliest spring plants pushing through the lingering snow. Clara found herself absorbing his quiet knowledge, the way he moved through the landscape as if he belonged to it as much as the trees and stones. One afternoon, he announced it was time to check on the cattle he'd wintered in a high meadow. "It's a fair ride," he warned. "You up for it?" Clara nodded eagerly. She'd been riding the recovered mare, whom she'd named Sage for her gray-green coat. around the property, rebuilding skills dormant since childhood. The prospect of seeing more of Elias's world sent a thrill through her. They set out early, saddled bags packed with provisions. The trail wound upward through pine forests that gradually gave way to aspen groves, their bare branches just beginning to show buds. Clara breathed deeply of the clean mountain air, feeling something tight in her chest finally loosening. "It's beautiful," she said as they paused to rest the horses at a scenic overlook. The valley spread below them, a patchwork of forest and meadow with the silver thread of a river winding through. Mary used to say God was an artist and the mountains were his masterpiece, Elias said, dismounting to stand beside her. I wasn't much for church talk, but seeing this, maybe she had a point. They stood in comfortable silence, the wind playing with Clara's hair, which she'd taken to wearing loose instead of in the severe bun Samuel had preferred. She felt Elias watching her and turned to find an expression on his face that made her heart skip. "What is it?" "Just thinking," he said softly. "How different you look from that half-frozen woman I found in the snow. There's color in your cheeks now, light in your eyes." "I feel different," Clara admitted, "like I'm waking up after a long, terrible dream." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The touch was becoming familiar now. These small intimacies they allowed themselves. A hand on the small of her back as he helped her mount Sage, fingers brushing as they passed tools or dishes, the way he'd pull her against his side when they sat by the fire in the evenings. They found the cattle in good condition, scattered across a meadow where a warm spring bubbled up, keeping the grass accessible even through winter. Elias rode among them, checking for injuries or illness, while Clara watched from a fallen log. "You love this life," she observed when he returned. "It's honest," he said, swinging down from his horse. "Hard but honest. The mountain doesn't lie to you, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It'll kill you if you're careless. But it's nothing personal. Just the way things are. And that's better than people. Some people." He sat beside her on the log, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Not all." The sun was warm on their faces, the first real warmth of spring. Clara closed her eyes, tilting her face to the light. She felt Elias shift beside her and opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that sent heat pooling in her stomach. "Clara," he said, her name a question. She answered by leaning into him, resting her head on his shoulder. His arm came around her, holding her close, and they sat that way as the cattle grazed peacefully around them, as if they had all the time in the world. The ride back was leisurely, both reluctant to end the day. As they descended into the valley, the sun painting the peaks gold and rose. Elias pointed to a distant ridge. "See that notch? Trail goes through there down to Silver Creek. When the snow's fully melted, it's only a day's ride to town." Clara felt her contentment evaporate. Town meant people. People meant questions. Questions meant the risk of Samuel finding her. "Hey," Elias said gently, reading her distress. "Nobody's making you go anywhere, just showing you the lay of the land." That night, Clara couldn't settle. She paced the cabin, started and abandoned half a dozen tasks, jumped at every small sound. Finally, Elias caught her hands, stilling her restless movement. "Talk to me," he said. "What's got you spooked?" "I've been fooling myself," she said, the words spilling out. "Pretending this could last, but it can't, can it? Sooner or later, I'll have to face the world again. And when I do—" "When you do, you won't be alone," Elias said firmly. "I told you, when you're ready, I'll be here. Whether that's tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now. You can't promise that. You don't even know. You don't know what he's capable of. Samuel, he's not just cruel, he's powerful. He has connections, money, influence. If he finds me, then we'll deal with it together. You don't understand." "No," Elias interrupted, his voice harder than she'd heard it. "You don't understand. I've already lost everything that mattered to me once. Watched it slip away while I stood helpless. I won't do that again. Not without a fight. The fierce protectiveness in his voice broke through her panic. Clara sagged against him, letting him hold her while her racing heart slowly calmed. "I'm scared," she whispered into his shirt. "I know. Being scared is all right, but don't let fear make your choices for you. That's no way to live." That night, Clara made a decision. She'd been keeping a journal, writing down the fragments of her new life, but now she wrote with purpose. Page after page, she documented everything: Samuel's cruelties, the nights of terror, the gradual escalation from harsh words to harder fists. It hurt to relive it, but she pushed through, needing to exorcise it from her soul. She wrote about Elias, too, his kindness, his patience, the way he'd given her space to heal while somehow always being exactly where she needed him. She wrote about the confusion of feeling her heart open again, the guilt of wanting something beautiful while still bound to something ugly. When she finally set down her pen, dawn was breaking. She found Elias already up, making coffee, and wordlessly handed him the journal. "You don't have to read it," she said, "but I needed you to be able to know who I really am." He took the journal carefully, as if it were made of spun glass. "This doesn't change who you are to me. Read it first, then decide." While he read, Clara busied herself with breakfast. Though her hands shook and she had no appetite, she heard him turn pages, heard his breathing change at certain parts, sharp intakes that told her he'd reached the worst moments. Once, she heard what sounded like a fist hitting the table, followed by forced calm, when he finally closed the journal. Clara couldn't bear to turn around. "Clara," his voice was rough, "look at me." She turned slowly, expecting disgust or pity. Instead, she found tears on his weathered face, tears of rage, of sorrow, but not an ounce of judgment. "No one," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "No one should endure what you've endured. What he did to you, that's not marriage. That's not what God intended when he made man and woman. I should have left sooner, should have been stronger. Don't—" He crossed to her in 2 strides, taking her shoulders gently. "Don't you dare blame yourself for surviving however you could. You got out. That's what matters." "But I'm still married to him. In the eyes of the law, the church—" "The law that let him hurt you? The church that would send you back to him? To hell with both." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You're free here. Free to choose. Free to heal. Free to be whoever you want to be." "I want to be yours," she whispered, the truth of it ringing through her. "Is that wrong? If it is, then I'm wrong too, because I want that more than my next breath." This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more urgent, full of promise and possession. Clara felt herself melting into him, her body recognizing safety, home, rightness in a way her battered soul was still learning to accept. When they parted, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "There's something else," Clara said. "In my sister's letter, the one I was carrying. She had a daughter. My niece is alone in Bozeman, in a mission school. I was trying to reach her when— Then we'll go get her." Elias said simply, "When the passes are clear, we'll go together." "Just like that? Just like that. This place could use the sound of a child's laughter again." The simple acceptance, the immediate inclusion of her needs into his life, undid her completely. Clara buried her face in his chest and wept, for the family she'd lost, for the years stolen by Samuel's cruelty, for this miraculous second chance at happiness. That night, as had become their custom, they sat by the fire together. But tonight, Clara didn't retreat to her bed when the hour grew late. Instead, she stayed in the circle of Elias's arms, feeling his heartbeat steady under her palm, matching her breathing to his. "Stay," she whispered when he shifted as if to rise. "Just stay with me. I don't want to be alone tonight." He hesitated, ever mindful of propriety, even here where no one could see. But the need in her voice overcame his reservations. They lay down together on the thick rug before the fire, fully clothed. Clara tucked against his chest with his arms wrapped protectively around her. "I love you," she said into the darkness, the words escaping before she could catch them. His arms tightened. "I love you too. God help me. I've loved you since you stood in my kitchen making bread and humming like you belonged there." They lay in silence after that, the weight of their confessions settling over them like a warm blanket. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. Then another, wild voices calling to their mates across the darkness. "The wolves," Clara murmured sleepily. "They mate for life, don't they?" "They do," Elias confirmed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Smart creatures, wolves." As sleep claimed her, safe in the arms of a man who saw her truly and loved her anyway. Clara thought perhaps she was learning to be smart too, learning that love wasn't supposed to hurt, that gentleness wasn't weakness, that sometimes the most courageous thing you could do was allow yourself to be happy. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, spring continued its patient work of bringing the world back to life. And inside, two souls who had known too much sorrow finally allowed themselves to dream of joy. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the emptiness of Elias's absence. Clara woke alone in her bed, the events of the previous night feeling like a dream, but the lingering warmth of his embrace, the echo of whispered confessions, these were real. She rose and dressed quickly, needing to see him, to assure herself that nothing had changed in the harsh light of day. She found the cabin empty, coffee already made but growing cold on the stove. Through the window, she could see Sage in the corral, but Elias's horse was gone. On the table lay a note in his careful hand. "Gone to check the north trap line, back by noon, E." Clara tried to settle into the day's routine, but unease prickled at her nerves. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, started bread, all the while fighting a growing sense of dread she couldn't name. When Sage whinnied nervously, pawing the ground, Clara's anxiety sharpened to a point. The sound of approaching hooves sent her to the window. Relief flooded her at the sight of Elias's familiar form, but it curdled instantly when she saw he wasn't alone. Behind him rode a stranger, a lean man with cold eyes and a deputy star glinting on his coat. Clara's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the windowsill, mind racing. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. She forced herself to breathe, to think perhaps this had nothing to do with her. Perhaps. But when Elias dismounted and she saw his face, carefully blank, jaw tight with suppressed emotion, she knew. He caught her eye through the window, and in that glance was both warning and reassurance. "Trust me," his eyes said. "I won't let him hurt you." Clara smoothed her skirts and opened the door, stepping onto the porch with a calm she didn't feel. "Elias," she said, proud when her voice didn't shake. "We have company?" "This is Deputy Morrison from Silver Creek," Elias said evenly. "He's looking for someone. Thought we might have seen her pass through." The deputy touched his hat. "Ma'am, sorry to trouble you, but I'm searching for a woman named Clara Whitmore. Ran off from her husband about 2 months back. He's mighty worried about her." "Worried?" Clara repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "Yes, ma'am. Poor man's beside himself. Says she's been ill, not in her right mind. Dangerous to herself." Morrison's eyes were shrewd, taking in every detail of her appearance. "You wouldn't happen to have seen anyone matching her description? Pretty woman, blonde hair, about your height?" Clara felt Elias tense beside her, but she lifted her chin. "I'm afraid we can't help you, Deputy. We've seen no one all winter except the occasional trapper." Morrison nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. "I see. Well, if you do happen to encounter her, you'll let us know. There's a reward. $500 for information leading to her safe return." "That's generous," Elias said, his tone neutral. "Mr. Whitmore is a generous man. Powerful, too. Has friends all the way to the territorial governor." The threat was subtle but clear. He just wants his wife back home where she belongs. "Of course," Clara said. "A woman belongs with her husband. Something flickered in Morrison's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition, but he simply touched his hat again. "I'll be heading back to town. Then, mind if I water my horse first?" "Help yourself," Elias said, gesturing to the trough, while Morrison tended his horse. Clara retreated inside, her composure cracking. She pressed her back against the door, fighting the urge to run. Elias followed, catching her hands. "Listen to me," he said urgently, voice low. "He suspects, but can't prove anything. We stick to our story. You're my cousin from back east, come to help after Mary died. Your name is Catherine," Clara supplied. "Catherine Mills." "Good. If he asks directly—" The door opened, and Morrison stepped inside without invitation, his eyes scanning the small space. They lingered on the bed Clara had been using, the women's clothes hanging on pegs, the general air of domestic comfort. "Cozy setup you have here," he observed. "Your cousin, you said?" "That's right," Elias confirmed, moving subtly between Morrison and Clara. "Funny thing, Mr. Whitmore's description of his wife, well, it matches your cousin pretty close." Morrison's hand rested casually on his gun belt. "Maybe I should take her back to town, just to clear things up." "No." The word came out harder than Elias intended. He moderated his tone. "That won't be necessary. Catherine's been here all winter, helping me out. She's never even met this Whitmore fellow. Then she won't mind coming to town to say so officially." Clara stepped around Elias before he could stop her. "Actually, Deputy, I do mind. I mind very much being accused of being some man's runaway wife. I mind being threatened and harassed in my cousin's home." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "No offense intended, ma'am. Just doing my job. Your job is to protect innocent people, not terrorize them on the word of a man you've never met." Clara let her voice shake with indignation rather than fear. "What proof do you have that this woman even exists? That she's truly his wife and not some poor soul fleeing genuine danger? The law. The law says a man owns his wife like chattel, that she has no right to safety, to dignity, to life itself if her husband chooses otherwise?" Clara was trembling now, but with rage rather than terror. "What kind of law is that?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "I don't make the laws, ma'am, I just enforce them." "Then enforce them elsewhere," Elias said coldly. "You've searched. You've found nothing. We've told you we haven't seen this woman. That's the end of it." For a long moment, the three stood in tense tableau. Then Morrison shrugged. "Have it your way, but I'll be back, and next time, I might not come alone." He left without another word, mounting his horse and riding away at an easy pace that said he was in no hurry, that he had all the time in the world to wait them out. Clara's knees gave out the moment he disappeared from view. Elias caught her, lowering her gently to a chair. "I have to go," she gasped. "Now, before he comes back. I can't let you—" "You're not going anywhere," Elias said firmly. "Not alone, not in panic. If we run now, it's as good as a confession. But if they come back, then we'll deal with it, together." He knelt before her, taking her face in his hands. "Did you think I'd let you face this alone? That I'd save you from a blizzard just to throw you to the wolves? This isn't your fight." "The hell it isn't." The vehemence in his voice startled them both. "You're mine, Clara. Mine to protect, mine to love, mine to keep safe. I failed Mary. Couldn't save her from the fever. I won't fail you." Clara pulled him close, burying her face in his neck. They stayed that way until their breathing calmed, until the immediate panic receded enough to think clearly. "We need a plan," Elias said finally. "I should write to Margaret's friend in Bozeman." Clara said, "The one who wrote about my niece. If I can establish that I have legitimate business there, a reason for traveling." "Good. And I'll ride to the mining camp tomorrow. Talk to some folks I know. Get a sense of how hard Morrison's pushing this, whether Samuel's here himself or just pulling strings from afar." They spent the evening preparing. Clara wrote her letter while Elias cleaned his rifle and checked his ammunition. The domestic scene would have been peaceful if not for the undercurrent of tension, the knowledge that their small paradise was under siege. That night, They didn't pretend to separate. Clara curled into Elias's arms in the bed they'd shared only in dreams before, needing his solid presence to keep the fear at bay. He held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair. "I won't let him take you," he murmured against her temple. "I'd die first." "Don't say that." Clara pressed closer, as if she could shield him with her own body. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Nothing's going to happen. We're going to get through this, get your niece, and live a long, boring life raising cattle and children." Children, despite everything. Clara found herself smiling. "That's rather presumptuous. Mr. Hartley." "Is it?" He tilted her chin up, studying her face in the dim light. "Tell me you haven't thought about it. Tell me you don't want everything, the whole life we could have together." "I want it so much it terrifies me," she admitted. "I'm afraid to hope for it." "Then I'll hope for both of us." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise rather than passion. But as the kiss deepened, as hands began to explore and bodies pressed closer, the sweetness transformed into something more urgent. They were both too aware of how fragile happiness could be, how quickly it could be snatched away. "Clara," Elias breathed, pulling back. "We should—" "No more shoulds," she interrupted. "No more waiting. I've spent 3 years dying by degrees. I want to live. Elias, I want to feel alive. Please." He searched her eyes, finding determination mixed with desire, with infinite tenderness. He began unbuttoning her nightgown, his hands reverent on her skin. Clara had known only roughness before, taking without giving. This was different, a mutual exploration, a conversation conducted in touches and sighs. When they came together at last, it was with a sense of coming home. Clara wept at the gentleness of it, the way Elias whispered her name like a prayer, the feeling of being cherished rather than conquered. They moved together in the darkness, two souls made one, defying the world that would keep them apart. Afterward, they lay entwined, sweat cooling on their skin, hearts gradually slowing. Clara traced patterns on Elias's chest, marveling at the reality of him, of this moment. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None, never." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we have this, we have now." "We'll have more than now," he promised. "We'll have always." But morning brought harsh reality in the form of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. Clara dressed quickly, hands steady despite her racing heart. Elias was already at the window, rifle in hand. "Morrison's back," he reported grimly. "Brought friends, 4 of them, all armed." Clara joined him at the window, among the riders. Her heart seized. Not Samuel himself, thank God, but his man Jenkins, the overseer who'd often held her down while Samuel raged. "I know him," she whispered. "The one in the black coat. He works for Samuel." Ellis' jaw tightened. "Then there's no more pretending. They know who you are. You should trust me." He set the rifle aside and pulled her close. "Whatever happens, remember, you're not alone anymore. You'll never be alone again." The pounding on the door was loud enough to shake the walls. Morrison's voice carried clearly. "Open up, Hartley. We know she's in there. Make this easy on everyone and send her out." Elias squeezed Clara's shoulders once, then moved to the door. "She's not going anywhere. Morrison, you want to talk, we'll talk, but she stays with me. That's not how this works." "That's exactly how this works." Elias's voice was steel. "You want her. You'll have to go through me. And I promise you, Deputy, that won't be as easy as you think." The silence stretched taut. Then Jenkins called out, his voice oily with false concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, Clara, your husband misses you terribly. He's sorry for the misunderstandings. He wants you to come home where you belong." Clara found her voice. "Tell my husband," she called back, "that I'd rather die free than live one more day as his property. Tell him I know what he is, and soon everyone else will too. Now, Clara." Jenkins's tone hardened. "Let's not be hasty. You know, mister, Whitmore doesn't like scenes. Come quietly, and all will be forgiven. Nothing needs forgiving except his crimes. Clara shot back. I have witnesses now. Jenkins, I have proof. Tell Samuel his days of terrorizing me are over. There was hurried, low conversation outside. Then Morrison spoke again. Hartley, you're harboring a fugitive wife. That's a serious crime. Prove it, Elias challenged. Prove she's his wife. Prove she has no right to leave. Prove your authority extends to dragging women from their homes on the say-so of violent men. More heated discussion outside. Clara could imagine Morrison's dilemma. He had suspicions, but no proof. Jurisdiction, but no clear legal ground. And Elias Hartley wasn't some helpless woman to be bullied. He was a man with roots in the community. Friends among the other mountain folk who wouldn't take kindly to heavy-handed tactics. Finally, Morrison called out, We'll be back, Hartley, with a warrant and more men. This isn't over. No, Elias agreed. It's just beginning. They listened to the horses retreat, waiting until the hoofbeats faded entirely before allowing themselves to breathe. Clara sagged against Elias, adrenaline leaving her shaky. They'll be back, she said. Yes, but not today. Morrison needs legal grounds, and that takes time. Elias guided her to a chair. Time we're going to use to run, to fight. His eyes blazed with determination. You said you have proof. Your journal, the scars, your testimony. There's a judge in Bozeman who's known for being fair, especially to women. We'll go there, file charges against Samuel, get your niece, and make it all legal and proper. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple, but it's possible. And that's more than you had before. He knelt before her, taking her hands. I told you, you're not alone anymore. My neighbors, the folks in town who know me, they'll stand with us. Samuel Whitmore might have money and influence, but he doesn't have the truth. And the truth, told loud enough, can topple kingdoms. Clara studied his face. This good man who'd chosen to stand between her and harm, who'd given her shelter, then friendship, then love, asking nothing in return but honesty. All right, she said softly. We fight. That's my girl. He pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself draw strength from his certainty. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. A new day, bringing new battles, but also new hope. They had perhaps a week before Morrison returned. A week to prepare, to gather allies, to shore up their defenses, both legal and physical. It wasn't much time, but it was more than Clara had ever had before, and she intended to use every moment of it. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Elias rode to neighboring homesteads, rallying support from the mountain community that had long respected him. Clara wrote letter after letter to the mission school in Bozeman about her niece, to a lawyer Elias knew there, to anyone who might help their cause. They worked with focused intensity, aware that each sunset brought Morrison's return closer. On the 5th day, unexpected allies arrived. Tom and Martha Henderson, Elias's nearest neighbors from the valley below, rode up with supplies and news. Whole town's talking about it, Tom said, accepting coffee from Clara. Deputy Morrison's been asking questions, but folks aren't cooperating. Nobody much likes the idea of dragging a woman back to a man she fled in a blizzard. Martha, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, took Clara's hands. Elias told us some of what you've been through. No woman should endure that. My sister lived that hell for 10 years before her husband drank himself to death. We'll stand with you. Their support was like a dam breaking. Other neighbors followed. The Zimmerman brothers who ran the sawmill, old Mrs. Patterson who kept the general store, even Reverend Blake from the small mountain church. Marriage is sacred, the Reverend said carefully, but so is life. And a marriage that threatens life is no marriage at all in God's eyes. Clara wept at their kindness, these rough mountain people who chose to stand with a stranger against the power of wealth and law. Elias held her as she cried, his own eyes suspiciously bright. The night before, they expected Morrison's return. Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching clouds scud across the moon, when Elias joined her. "Scared?" he asked softly. "Terrified," she admitted. "Not for myself, but for you, for all these people risking themselves for me. That's what community does." Elias said, "We look after our own, and you're one of us now." Clara turned in his arms, studying his face in the moonlight. "I love you," she said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know. You gave me back my life. You gave me back myself." "You did that yourself," he corrected. "I just gave you space to remember who you were." They made love with desperate tenderness, each touch a promise, each kiss a vow. When dawn came, they rose together, dressed together, faced together whatever the day would bring. Morrison arrived at mid-morning, but not as expected. He came alone, his manner subdued rather than aggressive. Elias met him at the door, rifle visible but not raised. "Hartley," Morrison said, removing his hat. "Mind if we talk? Just talk." Elias studied him, then stepped aside. Morrison entered, nodding to Clara with something almost like respect. "Ma'am, Mrs. Whitmore, I suppose I should say." Clara lifted her chin. "What do you want? Deputy?" Morrison sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. "I've been doing some investigating, talking to folks, reading between the lines. Your husband's man, Jenkins, he let some things slip when he was drinking, things that made me uncomfortable with this situation." "Go on," Elias prompted. "I took an oath to uphold the law," Morrison continued. "But I also swore to protect folks. Hard to reconcile those two when the law says I should return a woman to a man who—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Let's just say I've got doubts about Mr. Whitmore's version of events." Hope fluttered in Clara's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I file my report, it's going to indicate that I found no trace of Clara Whitmore in these mountains. Far as the law is concerned, she vanished without a trace." He met Clara's eyes. "But I'd suggest that Catherine Mills and her cousin might want to take a trip. Maybe visit family elsewhere for a while. We're going to Bozeman." Elias said, "File proper papers. Do this legal?" Morrison nodded slowly. "That might work. Judge Carpenter there, he's got daughters. Might be sympathetic." He stood to leave, then paused. "Jenkins and the others are staying at the hotel in Silver Creek. They're not happy about my decision. I'd travel careful if I were you." After he left, Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "He's letting us go," she breathed. "He's giving us a chance," Elias corrected. "We still need to move fast." They left that afternoon, taking the mountain trails Elias knew like the back of his hand. Clara rode sage, her few possessions in saddlebags, her journal and letters wrapped in oilcloth for protection. The neighbors had offered to watch the homestead, tend the animals. It felt like leaving home, because that's what the cabin had become, the first real home she'd known since childhood. The journey to Bozeman took 3 days of hard riding, skirting the main roads to avoid potential confrontations. They camped rough, sleeping under the stars, always alert for sounds of pursuit. But the mountains seemed to shelter them, providing safe passage to those who respected their ways. On the morning of the 3rd day, they crested a rise and saw Bozeman spread below them, a proper town with churches and schools and law offices. Somewhere down there was Margaret's daughter, waiting unknowingly for an aunt she'd never met. "Ready?" Elias asked. Clara reached for his hand. "Together?" "Always." They rode down into town like they belonged there, Clara's head high despite her travel-worn clothes. The lawyer Elias had contacted, Mr. Josiah Garrett, was expecting them. His office smelled of leather and tobacco, the walls lined with law books that represented both hope and fear. "Mrs. Whitmore." Garrett greeted her, his manner professional but not unkind. "Elias has told me something of your situation. I must warn you, challenging a husband's authority is difficult. Not impossible, but difficult." "I understand," Clara said, "but I have documentation, evidence of cruelty and abuse, and I'm willing to testify publicly if needed." Garrett's eyebrows rose. That's unusual. Most women in your position prefer to handle matters quietly. Quietly is what allowed him to hurt me for 3 years, Clara said firmly. I'm done being quiet. They spent hours in that office, Clara recounting dates and incidents while Garrett took careful notes. She showed him her journal, rolled up her sleeves to reveal old scars, answered every invasive question with steady determination. Elias sat beside her throughout, his presence a silent support. There's precedent, Garrett finally said. Not much, but some. Extreme cruelty as grounds for dissolution of marriage. The fact that you fled in winter, risking death rather than remain, speaks to the severity of your situation. He leaned back, studying them. But Mr. Whitmore will fight this. His reputation, his business interests. He can't afford to let you simply walk away. Then we fight back, Elias said. What do we need? Witnesses would help. Anyone who saw injuries, heard threats. Clara thought of the servants who'd averted their eyes, the doctor who'd set her ribs without asking questions, the society ladies who'd noticed bruises but said nothing. Would any of them speak for her now? There might be some, she said slowly. His housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, she was kind to me. And Dr. Marsh, he treated my injuries more than once. I'll write to them, Garrett said, discreetly. In the meantime, I'll file papers with Judge Carpenter, request an emergency hearing based on credible fear of harm. He paused. Where are you staying? We haven't, Clara began. The Riverside Hotel. Elias interrupted. Mr. and Mrs. Ellis Hartman. Garrett's eyes flickered between them, but he said nothing about the obvious fiction. Very well. I'll send word when I have news. And Mrs. Whitmore. Try not to worry. Judge Carpenter is a fair man. They left the office as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Clara felt drained but oddly lighter, as if speaking her truth to the lawyer had lifted some invisible weight. The hotel? She asked Elias. Unless you'd prefer somewhere else. No, Mr. and Mrs. Hartman? He stopped walking, turning to face her. I know we're not, that is, I shouldn't have presumed. Clara silenced him with a kiss, there on the public street, not caring who saw. I'd be proud to be Mrs. Hartman, she said when they parted. Someday, when I'm free. That's all I needed to hear. They registered at the hotel without incident, the clerk barely glancing at them as he handed over the key. Their room was simple but clean, with a view of the mountains that made Clara homesick for the cabin already. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in months, Clara found herself restless. The space felt too enclosed after the freedom of the mountains. Elias seemed to understand, pulling her close and telling her stories of his childhood in these valleys, until she finally relaxed. Tomorrow, we'll go to the mission school, he said. Find your niece. What if she doesn't want to come with us? She doesn't know me at all. Then we'll take time to let her get to know you. We'll do this right. Clara, build the family you deserve. The next morning brought unexpected news. Garrett arrived at their hotel early, his face grim. Samuel Whitmore is in town, he announced. Arrived on the morning train with 3 lawyers and a briefcase full of affidavits swearing to your mental instability. Clara's blood ran cold. He's here? He's filed a counterpetition. Garrett continued, claiming you stole money and jewelry when you left, that you're delusional and dangerous. He's demanding immediate return of his property, meaning you, and damages. Lies, Elias growled. All of it lies. Of course, but he has witnesses willing to swear to it. Servants he's paid or threatened. Business associates who owe him favors. Garrett's expression was grave. He's also got a doctor's statement claiming you suffer from hysteria brought on by your inability to bear children. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. The cruelest lie of all, when it was Samuel's violence that had cost her the baby she'd carried briefly, the child he'd beaten out of her in one of his rages. When's the hearing? She asked, voice steady despite the pain. Day after tomorrow. Judge Carpenter agreed to hear both petitions together. Garrett leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to know, is there anything in your past Samuel could use against you? Any indiscretions? Any moments of weakness he could twist? Nothing, Clara said firmly. I was a faithful wife, even when he gave me every reason not to be. My only crime was surviving. Then we stick to the truth, Garrett said. It's our strongest weapon. But as he left and Clara stood at the window watching the street below, she wondered if truth was enough. Samuel had money, power, influence. He had a narrative that society wanted to believe. The hysterical wife, the patient husband, the natural order restored. Clara. Elias's hand settled on her shoulders. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about David and Goliath, she said. About how sometimes the giant wins. Not this time. His voice was fierce. Not when you've got an army of mountain folk ready to stand witness. Not when you've got right on your side, and not when you've got me. Clara turned in his arms, drawing strength from his certainty. Outside. She caught a glimpse of a familiar figure, Jenkins, loitering across the street, watching their hotel. The sight should have frightened her. Instead, it made her angry. You're right, she said. Not this time. I've run far enough. Time to make my stand. That afternoon, they visited the mission school. The Mother Superior, a stern woman with surprising gentle eyes, listened to their story with growing sympathy. Little Emma is a dear child, she said, speaking of Margaret's daughter. Quiet, thoughtful. She's been waiting for family to claim her. When they brought Emma to the visiting room, Clara's heart clenched. The child had Margaret's eyes, the same stubborn chin. She was thin, too serious for her 6 years. But when Clara knelt and opened her arms, Emma came without hesitation. Aunt Clara, she whispered. Mama said you'd come. She said you'd find me. Clara held her niece and wept, feeling Margaret's presence in the child's embrace. When she finally looked up, Elias was watching with suspiciously bright eyes. Emma, Clara said, this is Mr. Hartley. He's family too. Emma studied Elias solemnly, then nodded. He has kind eyes, she pronounced. Mama said to trust kind eyes. The Mother Superior agreed to release Emma to their care, pending the legal proceedings. As they left the school, Emma's small hand in Clara's. Clara felt the rightness of it. This was what she was fighting for. Not just her own freedom, but the chance to give Emma the love and stability she deserved. That evening, in their hotel room with Emma asleep on a cot by the window, Clara and Elias planned for the hearing. They had Garrett's legal expertise, the promise of several mountain neighbors to testify, and now Emma, tangible proof that Clara had family, responsibilities, a life beyond Samuel's control. It's going to be brutal, Elias warned. Samuel will say anything to discredit you. I know. Clara looked at Emma's peaceful face, so trusting in sleep. But she's worth fighting for. This life we're building, it's all worth fighting for. As the night deepened, they held each other and prepared for battle. Tomorrow would bring Samuel and all his fury. But tonight, in this small room with the two people she loved most, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt powerful. The hearing would determine her legal fate. But Clara had already won the greater victory. She'd found her voice, her strength, her ability to love and trust again. Whatever Samuel said or did couldn't take that from her. And when morning came, she would walk into that courtroom with her head high, ready to speak her truth to power. The mountains had given her shelter. Elias had given her love, and Emma had given her purpose. Now it was time to claim her freedom. The courthouse stood like a fortress of justice in the center of Bozeman, its stone steps worn smooth by years of petitioners seeking fairness. Clara climbed them slowly, Elias on one side, Garrett on the other, aware of the crowd gathering behind them. Word had spread through the town, a woman challenging her husband's authority in open court. Some came to support, others to scandalize, but all came to witness. Samuel was already there, seated with his trio of lawyers like a king holding court. He dressed impeccably, every inch the successful merchant, the wronged husband. When Clara entered, his eyes found hers immediately, cold and promising retribution. "Don't look at him," Elias murmured. "He has no power here." But Clara did look, meeting Samuel's gaze steadily. The man who'd terrorized her for 3 years seemed somehow smaller in this public space, his menace diminished by the presence of law and witnesses. When he looked away first, Clara felt a surge of triumph. Judge Carpenter entered precisely at 9 o'clock, a lean man with thoughtful eyes and prematurely gray hair. He surveyed the packed courtroom with mild surprise, then rapped his gavel. "This court will hear the matter of Whitmore versus Whitmore," he announced. "Both petition and counterpetition. Mr. Garrett, as the initial filing was yours, please begin." Garrett rose, his manner calm and professional. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mrs. Clara Whitmore fled her home in fear for her life, that she endured years of systematic abuse that no law should force her to continue enduring, and that she has both the right and the responsibility to seek safety and freedom." Samuel's lead attorney, a pompous man named Richardson, objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of abandonment, a wife's duty. You'll have your turn." "Mr. Richardson," Judge Carpenter interrupted. "Continue. Mr. Garrett." What followed was a careful presentation of facts. Garrett called Mrs. Dalton, Samuel's former housekeeper, who traveled from Silver Creek despite obvious fear. Her voice shook as she described finding Clara unconscious, seeing bruises shaped like handprints, hearing crashes and cries from behind closed doors. "Did you ever witness Mr. Whitmore strike his wife?" Garrett asked. Mrs. Dalton glanced at Samuel, then straightened her shoulders. "Yes, sir, more than once. Saw him backhand her for serving cold tea. Saw him push her down the stairs for speaking to a delivery man?" Richardson cross-examined brutally, questioning Mrs. Dalton's eyesight, her memory, her motivations, but the woman held firm, and her testimony clearly affected the court. Dr. Marsh came next, producing medical records that documented a pattern of injuries: broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, facial contusions. His clinical recitation was more damning than any emotional plea. "In your professional opinion," Garrett asked, "were these injuries consistent with accidents, as Mr. Whitmore claimed?" "No, sir. They were consistent with repeated physical assault." The mountain neighbors testified too, Tom Henderson describing Clara's condition when found, Martha speaking of the fear she'd seen in Clara's eyes, Reverend Blake offering thoughtful words about the sanctity of life over the letter of law. Then it was Clara's turn. She rose on unsteady legs, but her voice was clear as she took the oath. Garrett led her through the story gently. Her marriage, the escalating violence, the night she fled. "Why did you leave that particular night?" Garrett asked. Clara closed her eyes briefly, remembering. "He'd broken my ribs again, but that wasn't why. It was the way he looked at me afterward, like I wasn't even human anymore, just a thing he owned that wasn't working properly. I knew if I stayed, I'd either die by his hand or by my own." "Objection," Richardson thundered. "Melodrama and speculation. Overruled," Judge Carpenter said quietly. "Continue. Mrs. Whitmore." Clara spoke of finding sanctuary with Elias, of slowly remembering who she'd been before fear ruled her life. She spoke of her niece, her plans for the future, her desire only for freedom and peace. Richardson's cross-examination was vicious. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you've been living in sin with Elias Hartley?" "I've been living in safety," Clara replied. "Answer the question. Have you engaged in adulterous relations?" Clara lifted her chin. "I found love with a good man who showed me kindness instead of cruelty. If that's a sin, then I'll answer for it to God, not to you." "So, you admit—" "I admit that I know the difference now between a marriage and a prison, between a husband and a jailer." Her voice strengthened. "I admit that I chose life over slow death, hope over despair. If the law says I should have stayed and suffered, then the law is wrong." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Carpenter rapped for silence, but his eyes remained on Clara with something like respect. Richardson changed tactics, producing the doctor's statement about hysteria and infertility. Your inability to provide your husband with children. My husband beat our child out of me, Clara said flatly, and the courtroom erupted. Through the chaos, she continued, voice rising over the noise. 3 months after our wedding, I quickened with child. Samuel flew into a rage because it would ruin my figure and interfere with his social plans. He pushed me down the stairs. I lost the baby and nearly died. Doctor, Marsh knows. He treated me afterward. Doctor, Marsh stood in the gallery. It's true, Your Honor. I was told it was an accident at the time, but the injuries were consistent with— Sit down, Richardson snapped. But the damage was done. Samuel finally took the stand. All righteous indignation and wounded pride. He painted Clara as unstable, ungrateful, delusional. He spoke of his patience, his generosity, his heartbreak at her abandonment. I only want my wife back, he said, managing to summon tears. Despite everything, I forgive her. A man protects what's his. But Garrett's cross-examination revealed the real Samuel. He asked about specific incidents Clara had described, and Samuel's temper began to fray. She exaggerates, Samuel snapped. Women are prone to dramatics. So you did strike her. I corrected her when necessary, as is my right as a husband. Corrected, I see. And the broken ribs, was that correction? Samuel's face reddened. She was clumsy. Multiple witnesses say otherwise. They're lying, Samuel exploded, jumping to his feet. She's turned them all against me with her tears and manipulation. A man has the right to manage his household as he sees fit. The law also prohibits assault. Judge Carpenter interrupted coldly. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. The judge retired to consider, leaving the courtroom in tense silence. Clara sat between Elias and Garrett, hands folded to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Samuel glared at her with naked hatred. Whatever happens, Elias whispered. You told your truth. You stood up to him. That took incredible courage. Emma, who'd been kept outside during testimony, was brought in as they waited. She climbed onto Clara's lap, small arms wrapping around her aunt's neck. Are we going home soon? She whispered. I hope so, sweetheart. Clara murmured, holding her close. Judge Carpenter returned after an hour, his expression grave. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. This court has heard disturbing testimony today, he began. The institution of marriage is indeed sacred, but it cannot be a shield for cruelty. The evidence presented shows a clear pattern of physical abuse that no person should be required to endure. Clara's heart hammered as he continued. However, the law as written gives me limited options. I cannot simply dissolve a marriage because one party is cruel. He paused, eyes finding Clara. But I can rule on the safety and welfare of those involved. He shuffled papers. Building suspense. It is the ruling of this court that misses. Clara Whitmore has demonstrated legitimate fear for her safety. A legal separation is granted, with the following provisions. Mr. Samuel Whitmore is prohibited from approaching within 100 yards of his wife. Mrs. Whitmore is granted custody of her niece. Emma. Property division will be decided in separate proceedings. Furthermore, his voice hardened, looking directly at Samuel. Based on testimony heard today, this court recommends that the territorial prosecutor investigate Mr. Whitmore for assault and battery. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with finality. For a moment, Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then Elias was pulling her to her feet. Garrett was shaking her hand. Emma was laughing, and the mountain folk were cheering. No! Samuel lunged across the aisle, face contorted with rage. She's mine. The law says. Tom Henderson and the Zimmerman brothers blocked him, creating a wall of mountain muscle. Deputy Morrison, who'd appeared sometime during the proceedings, stepped forward with shackles. Mr. Whitmore, you're under arrest for contempt of court and attempted assault. Come quietly now. As they led Samuel away, he twisted to snarl at Clara. This isn't over. You're still my wife. I'll never let you go. But his words were empty now. the threats of a man stripped of power. Clara watched him go, feeling nothing but pity for the smallness of him. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun felt like a blessing. Clara stood on the steps, Emma's hand in hers, Elias solid and warm at her side. The neighbors gathered around, offering congratulations and support. "So what now?" Martha Henderson asked. Clara looked up at Elias, seeing her future in his eyes. "Now we go home," she said simply. "All of us. The separation isn't the same as divorce," Garrett warned. "It could take years to fully dissolve the marriage." "Then we'll wait," Elias said, arm coming around Clara's shoulders. "We've got time now." As they made their way through town, Clara noticed other women watching from windows and doorways. Some with bruised faces, some with careful movements that spoke of hidden pain. Her victory wouldn't help them all, but perhaps it would show them that victory was possible. That evening, in the hotel room that had become their temporary home, Clara sat brushing Emma's hair while the child chattered about the train ride they'd take tomorrow, the mountains she'd see, the chickens at the cabin. "Will I have my own room?" Emma asked. "We'll make you one," Elias promised, with a window facing the sunrise. After Emma fell asleep, Clara stepped onto the small balcony, breathing in the cool night air. Elias joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You did it," he murmured. "You faced him down and won." "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." They stood in peaceful silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring the journey home, the work of building a life together, the slow healing that time would bring. There would be challenges, legal proceedings to finalize, Samuel's inevitable appeals, the gossip and judgment of those who thought she should have suffered in silence. But tonight, Clara Whitmore was free, not fully divorced, but separated, not legally Elias's wife, but his in every way that mattered, not Emma's mother, but her guardian and protector. "I love you," she said to the night, to Elias, to the future stretching before them. "And I love you," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." In the morning, they would return to the mountains that had sheltered her. But Clara carried the mountains within her now, their strength, their endurance, their wild freedom that no law could cage. She'd been bruised by rage, broken by cruelty. But in the end, love had proven stronger than fear, truth more powerful than lies. And in a cabin where kindness lived, she would finally, fully heal. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles. But Clara read promise in their light. She'd won more than a legal ruling today. She'd won the right to choose her own path, love on her own terms, build the family her heart had always craved. It was, she thought as Elias held her close, more than enough to begin. 2 years had passed since the courthouse victory, and the mountains had witnessed the quiet transformation of 3 lives into one family. The cabin that had once echoed with Elias's solitude now rang with Emma's laughter, Clara's singing, and the comfortable rhythms of a home filled with love. Clara stood in the garden she'd coaxed from the mountain soil, watching Emma chase chickens with the determination of an 8-year-old on a mission. The child had bloomed in the mountain air, growing strong and confident, her serious demeanor giving way to the natural joy of childhood. "Emma, gentle with Henrietta," Clara called, smiling as the girl carefully cornered their best-laying hen. "I'm being gentle. Aunt Clara, she just doesn't know it yet." The sound of hoofbeats drew Clara's attention to the trail. Elias was returning from town, and the way he sat his horse, straight-backed, alert, told her he carried news. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to meet him. "Letter from Garrett," he said, dismounting and pulling her into a brief embrace. His kisses still made her heart race. Even after 2 years, the divorce is final? Clara stared at the envelope he offered, hardly daring to believe. Final, truly. Samuel's appeal was denied. His criminal conviction made it easy for the judge to rule. "You're free, Clara, completely, legally free." She sank onto the porch steps, clutching the letter. Inside was the official decree, stamped and sealed. After all the waiting, The legal maneuvering, the distant threats from a man now serving time for assault and fraud. His business dealings hadn't survived scrutiny either. It was over. "I'm free," she whispered, then louder, laughing. "I'm free!" Emma ran over, curious about the commotion. "What's wrong, Aunt Clara?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Everything's right." Clara pulled her niece close. "Everything's finally right." That evening, as spring rain pattered gently on the roof, Elias took Clara's hands across the dinner table. "I've been waiting 2 years to ask this properly," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Clara Whitmore, or whoever you choose to be now, will you marry me, real and legal, in front of God and everybody?" "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Emma clapped her hands. "Does this mean I can call you Papa now?" she asked Elias. The big man's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored, little one." They were married a month later, on a perfect June day when the mountain meadows burst with wildflowers. The ceremony was simple, held in the clearing near the cabin, with Reverend Blake presiding and their mountain community gathered to witness. Clara wore a dress of soft blue. She was done with white, done with pretending to be something she wasn't. Emma stood as her bridesmaid, beaming with importance. The Henderson family provided music, Tom's fiddle singing joy across the mountains. "Do you, Clara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Reverend Blake asked. "I do," Clara said, voice clear and certain. "With all my heart." "And do you, Elias, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Elias replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "Today and always." When they kissed, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the valley below. Martha Henderson wiped her eyes, muttering about mountain dust. Even Deputy Morrison, who'd become an unexpected friend, looked suspiciously misty. The celebration lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under the weight of food neighbors had brought. Children ran wild in the twilight, Emma leading them in games. Music and laughter filled the air, and Clara danced with her husband, until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. "Happy?" Elias asked as they swayed together under the stars. "So happy I could burst," Clara admitted. "I never imagined, after everything, that life could be this good." "This is just the beginning," he promised. As summer gave way to autumn, Clara began writing in earnest. What started as journal entries became something more. A book about her experiences, about the reality of women trapped in violent marriages, about the possibility of escape and redemption. "You're brave to write this," Elias said one evening, reading pages over her shoulder. "Other women need to know they're not alone." Clara replied, "That survival is possible, that there can be life, good life, after terror." The book, when published under the pseudonym C.M. Hartley, caused quite a stir. Letters poured in from women across the territory and beyond. Some shared their own stories. Others asked for advice. A few simply said, "Thank you for giving me hope." Clara answered every letter, sometimes enclosing pressed wildflowers from the mountain, small tokens of encouragement from one survivor to another. Emma thrived in school, riding her pony down the mountain trail each day to the new schoolhouse in the expanded settlement below. She showed a talent for riding like her aunt, but also her uncle's steady way with animals. The child who'd been so solemn was now known for her infectious laugh and fierce loyalty to friends. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, Clara felt the quickening in her womb that she'd thought she'd never experience again. The terror was immediate, memories of what Samuel had done, but Elias's joy was so complete, so protective, that fear gradually gave way to wonder. "A baby," she whispered. "Our baby. Our miracle," Elias corrected, hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Emma was ecstatic at the prospect of being a big sister. She immediately began planning all the things she would teach the baby: how to collect eggs without getting pecked, the best hiding spots in the barn, which wildflowers were safe to pick. Dr. Marsh, who'd moved to the mountains partly out of disgust with Silver Creek's tolerance of abuse, monitored Clara carefully through the pregnancy. "Everything looks perfect," he assured them. "This baby is strong, and so are you." Clara's daughter was born as spring returned to the mountains. Arriving with the dawn chorus of birds, they named her Margaret Rose, for the sister whose memory had led Clara to freedom, and for the wild roses that bloomed around the cabin. "She's perfect," Emma whispered, touching the baby's tiny fingers with awe. "Just like her big sister," Clara said, kissing Emma's forehead. The years that followed were filled with the ordinary miracles of family life. Emma grew into a confident young woman who spoke her mind and stood her ground. Little Maggie, as they called her, toddled, then ran through the mountain meadows, fearless and free in a way that made Clara's heart soar. Elias expanded the cabin, adding rooms for their growing family and the occasional woman who arrived at their door. Fleeing situations too familiar to Clara, they always found shelter, always found help to start again. The mountain sanctuary that had saved Clara became a beacon for others seeking safety. Clara's writing continued, her voice growing stronger with each book. She spoke at churches and town halls, telling her story, advocating for changes in laws that trapped women with violent men. It wasn't easy. Many thought she should keep quiet about such private matters, but the letters from women who'd found courage in her words kept her going. One autumn day, as Clara sat on the porch watching Maggie and Emma pick apples in the orchard they'd planted, Elias settled beside her. "Any regrets?" he asked, taking her hand. Clara thought of the journey that had brought her here, the terror, the flight through snow, the uncertain days of healing. Then she looked at what that journey had given her, this man who loved her truly, these children who called her Mama, this life built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "Not one," she said firmly. "Every step led me here, led me home." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara reflected on the words she'd written in her latest book. "We are not defined by what was done to us, but by what we choose to do with our freedom. We are not victims of our past, but authors of our future." The old Clara, frightened, bruised, certain she deserved no better, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who'd learned that love shouldn't hurt, that strength could be gentle, that broken things could indeed be made beautiful again. "Mama, look," Maggie called, holding up a particularly large apple. "Big as my head." "Bring it here, little love." Clara called back, laughing. "We'll make pie." As her daughters ran toward the cabin, Clara sent up a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided her through that blizzard to Elias's door. She'd thought she was running away from life, but instead, she'd run straight toward it, abundant, joyful, and more beautiful than she'd ever dared imagine. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to transformation, guardians of hope. And in a cabin where love lived, a family gathered for supper, their laughter rising like smoke from the chimney, a signal to all who might need it. Here is safety. Here is healing. Here is home. Clara had been bruised by rage, but she'd healed where love lived. And in that healing, she'd discovered the greatest truth of all, that the human heart, no matter how battered, always holds the capacity for joy. Thank you so much for listening to Clara and Elias's story. I hope their journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Are you cozied up at home, on your commute, or perhaps somewhere unexpected? Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of courage, love, and redemption from the American frontier. And please share your thoughts about Clara's transformation. Your insights make our campfire circle complete.